grateful to meet together as a world history class. We ask that Thy Spirit be with us this day, that it may guide us in the things that we discuss, and that it may confirm into our minds those things that we speak of and the truths thereof. May we be able to apply these teachings to our lives to help us individually, as a family, and as a nation. We are grateful for those who have gone before us that have made the sacrifices necessary for us to have such enjoyable lives. We're grateful for those who have sacrificed for the building of American Heritage School, and are indeed grateful that we are the recipients of that wonderful knowledge and the wonderful facilities which we are able to enjoy. We are so grateful for a living prophet. Ask Thou to please bless him and be with him at all times. Bless us that our minds and hearts will always be willing and open to those things that he teaches us. And we say these things in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thanks so much for that wonderful prayer, Heidi. I really appreciated your sincerity. Well, I should go back and listen to the start of each class, but I think I say almost the same thing every day. But we have another interesting class today. I think I say that every day. But I really do believe that we have a very interesting class today. And I really think that some of the principles that we'll discuss, hopefully get down into our hearts, will be very profound, because I've been thinking a lot about them, and my wife and I have been talking a lot about them, and so it should be very interesting. As we talk about containment in the early 1950s, we'll look at the end of Truman's administration, and we'll start Eisenhower's administration. We'll look at Korea, Iran, and McCarthyism, roughly 1950 to 54. Okay, well, if we go back to 1948, a little bit before 1950, we'll see how the Cold War started to become hot in Korea, on the Korean Peninsula. 1948, the Soviet occupation zone north of the 38th parallel on the Korean Peninsula became a communist satellite with the creation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which we know today as North Korea, or the DPRK. And the U.S. occupation zone south of the 38th parallel became the pro-West Republic of Korea, South Korea, or the ROK, as it's known today. Soviet-supported Kim Il-sung became a dictator in the DPRK, while U.S.-supported Syngman Rhee became president in the ROK. And I think it is interesting if you look at how those names have been Romanized. Kim Il-sung is done according to the traditional Korean method of having the surname first and then the other names. But really, Syngman Rhee is Lee Sung-man. So if you ever hear Lee Sung-man, same guy, Syngman Rhee. Okay, as occupation forces demobilized in both the north and south, Stalin encouraged Kim to invade the ROK to unify the entire peninsula as a communist stronghold and to oust the Americans. He provided Kim with a war plan that called for North Korean forces to capture Seoul in 3 days and the entire ROK within a week. So let's take a look at a document you read then, and we'll reason together from Dulles and Allison to Atchison and Rusk, 2 Johns to 2 Deans, which I kind of thought was neat. 1950. 25th of June 1950, 80,000 North Korean troops, supported by both Stalin's USSR and Mao's PRC, the People's Republic of China, invaded South Korea. So let's reason together then. What do Dulles and Allison, American diplomats in Tokyo, propose as the first U.S. reaction to the North Korean invasion?
Well, it was kind of they should try to take care of themselves if they can.
Right, yeah. So first of all, let's see if they can handle it on their own. And then the second reaction, right? What's the second reaction that's proposed to the Secretary of State Atchison and then the Assistant Secretary of State Dean Rusk if the South Koreans cannot contain and repulse the North Korean attack?
To have the U.S. join the war.
Right, so the U.S. to join it, right? The United States force should be used, and this is a very interesting proposition. We'll see where it leads. Once again, this is containment in a very big way, committing, as we'll see, hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops to this policy of containment in or on the Korean Peninsula. Okay, what reasons then do Dulles and Allison give for their second recommendation, this recommendation that the U.S. needs to go in and then help to stop this invasion by North Korea? What are the reasons?
Well, that it could lead to a world war.
Right, yeah. To sit by while Korea is overrun by unprovoked armed attack would start a disastrous chain of events, and we'll see that that logic of a chain of events is one that really runs through Truman's and Eisenhower's respective presidencies. That chain of events leading most probably to world war, as Heidi said. Okay, so then what's the third suggestion? And this is also an interesting one that Dulles and Allison make.
To see if the UN can help.
Right. So UN Security Council, let's see if they can call for action on behalf of the South Koreans who've been attacked by this act of aggression. Interestingly enough, of course, we see the Soviet Union sitting on the Security Council, and we realize, well, it's interesting, they actually weren't there. The Soviet representative to the Security Council wasn't there when the vote was taken, and so the UN did decide to move troops into South Korea to help defend the invasion. And that would have been a different vote, obviously, if the representative from the USSR had been there. Well, let's take a look at this now as we try to think about this policy of containment and how in the Korean War it would be used in such a big way. There's this great quote by President Harold B. Lee. I want you to read that quote, and then I want you to relate it. What is he saying? What lessons can we learn? And then how would that apply to ourselves as we think about containment? Of course, also, you can connect it to the Korean War if you'd like.
The idea that spreading the gospel is what will best contain communism.
Yeah, and isn't that a great proposition? How if we spin that out a little further, right? What would we say about that as we relate it?
One thing I'm thinking about is how encouraging, basically that telegram encouraged war, and war usually seems to happen when people are afraid or angry or both, or power hungry. But in this case, it seems like the Cold War, and it's a little, you can kind of see where people are coming from, understanding that they've been through 2 world wars and they're afraid for a third, but just being driven by fear kind of at times can just lead to violence to try to fight back and defend, whereas this doesn't seem to talk about fear or fighting. It's more, the real truth is out there and we can spread it. And I just like how it is a beautiful quote that talks more about peace than about being afraid for communism or afraid of the future, but just to really proclaim the truth and be confident that we have the truth and that will, in the end, beat anything that is out there that's trying to go against the truth.
Yeah, that's great comment, Saul. Thank you so much, Christina, for that one. Was that Heidi who was going to say something as well?
Well, it was just short. It was just reminding me of the quote that the study of the gospel, this isn't exactly, but something to the effect that the study of the gospel will change human behavior much quicker than the study of human behavior. Even though that's not directly related, it just reminds me again that over and over again reminded, it's the study of the gospel, it's the application of the gospel that really changes things.
Yeah, excellent. It's a great comment. In fact, I actually had a slide with that one, and then for the sake of time, I actually cut that one out. So you and I were thinking on the same wavelength, Heidi. Well, excellent. Well, let's keep looking because this is very, very interesting here. Of course, right? As I said, as we'll see with Eisenhower, as we'll see with Truman, right? There is this great fear that if one country falls, it will start a chain reaction, right? As Eisenhower would say, right? This domino theory, this reaction of dominoes falling down. If one falls down, eventually the last one falls down too. right? Well, there's this great quote by Elder Maxwell, and I just love how he talks about doctrinal dominoes. And there's this great relation. Of course, this isn't related to the Korean War, but as we relate this to our own lives, we think about that sort of domino theory, or this theory of, if one goes down, at the end, it can fall as well. How would we relate this to the gospel in our own lives, would you say? It's this great quote here. You can scan through it, but what would you say?
I guess the domino effect that I see here is that if you knock over the first domino of saying that Christ was the Son of God, that everything else in your religion comes tumbling down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, right? And I love thinking about it that way, because truly, if we remove ourselves from communism and from the Korean War for a moment, we just think about ourselves, right? Truly, as you said, right? If we take out that linchpin, right, of Christ in our lives, well, really doesn't matter what else we do. There was that great talk a few conferences ago talking about how any other way, right, is foolishness, right? Any other way other than, right, through Jesus Christ is foolishness. It doesn't matter what it is, and I love thinking about that. Thanks so much for that comment, Wendy. Well, if we look at the Korean War then, and we see how Truman reacted, right? Let's look at the war now, 50 to 53. Truman was outraged and exclaimed, quote, "The attack upon Korea makes it plain beyond all doubt that communism has passed beyond the use of subversion to conquer independent nations and will now use armed invasion and war," close quote. Truman, and take a look at these decisions. This is very interesting for setting modern precedent in terms of foreign policy making. Truman, in two controversial decisions, then decided to wage war under the auspices of the UN and to engage American forces without asking Congress for a formal declaration of war because, he said, it was authorized by a UN Security Council resolution and was, therefore, technically a police action. This war by order of a president, rather than by a vote of Congress, set a radical, dangerous precedent for the United States. Fearing that Stalin-influenced aggression in Korea was part of a larger communist push throughout Asia, Truman also ordered a major expansion of America's NATO forces and increased U.S. assistance to the French in Indochina, which was the beginning of America's increased presence in, foreshadowing, Vietnam, right? So, Truman poured 350,000 American air, naval, and ground forces onto the Korean Peninsula. South Korea mustered 400,000 troops, and other UN nations, and I think this is a very interesting number to compare here, other UN nations altogether contributed 50,000 men. General Douglas MacArthur led the unified resistance. In the war's first 3 months, North Korean forces pushed the UNROK coalition to the brink of defeat as they swept the entire peninsula under their feet, except for a small section of land surrounding Pusan in the southeastern corner of Korea. In a daring move, MacArthur avoided surrender and swung the war's momentum through a synchronized landing at Incheon and breakout from Busan. The DPRK, that's North Korea, was routed and retreated all the way back across the 38th parallel. MacArthur then tried for a reunification of the peninsula by pushing the North Korean forces all the way to the border of China's Yalu River. It was October, and MacArthur predicted a total victory by Christmas. But the PRC, the People's Republic of China, launched an invasion from China, which employed massive human wave assaults to send the UNROK coalition into a desperate retreat. With China now directly involved in the conflict, the world feared the onset of World War III. By 1951, it was clear that Truman and MacArthur didn't agree on the ultimate American objective for the war. Truman was willing to negotiate a peace that would contain communism at the 38th parallel. Right? That's where the division between North and South Korea was originally. While MacArthur itched for the opportunity to take China head-on and strike at the root of communism in Asia. Following several confrontations, Truman removed MacArthur on April 11, 1951. By June 1951, plans for a ceasefire and armistice along the 38th parallel were underway. Despite dragging on for another 2 years, the peace talks, finished by Truman's successor Dwight D. Eisenhower, ultimately contained communism according to Truman's plans. Though an armistice, and this is important to note, which is technically an agreement to stop fighting with an eye toward the signing of an official peace treaty, was signed in 1953 in the village of Panmunjom, the DPRK and ROK have never been able to agree on terms for a final peace, and the Korean War simmers still today, almost 60 years later. Each year, a handful of soldiers add their names to the list of 1 million ROK, and in comparison, the U.S. suffered 130,000, 1.5 million DPRK, and 2.5 million civilian casualties of the Korean War. A demilitarized zone created by the UN to be a buffer between North and South Korea straddles the 38th parallel, separating armies that face off along what has become the most heavily militarized border in the world. Today, the DMZ is a place of firefights, the downing of straying airplanes, incursion tunnels, defecting citizens, and propaganda. A place where the Cold War never ended, and where the threat of North Korean invasion mars the dream of reunification in the land of the morning calm. So, if we take a look at some relating, some very interesting relating, I'd like you to read this story to yourself from Elder Maxwell about this great man who I actually had an opportunity to meet, Lee Ho-nam. He was a professor at BYU, taught in the Korean department there. He's a very close friend of President Hinckley, and just was an amazing man. Would become the first stake president in Korea, and was anyway just a gigantic saint. In these latter days. Anyway, but take a look at this story about him, and let's look at another aspect of the Korean War, which I think is also important to consider. And then let's relate it. And what's the great lesson behind this?
The lesson is that even within tragedy, we can find opportunities to do good things. For example, the tragedy of war can be used as an opportunity to spread the gospel.
Yeah, definitely. And I am as you'll see in just a couple slides, I am personally grateful, for opportunities like this, because really this is how the gospel got to Korea at its start, and the gospel has just flourished there ever since. 1985, it got a temple, the first on mainland Asia, in Seoul, and truly, the Korean saints are just blessed people. Well, of course, there are other stories too. I think it's very interesting if you look at this one here from Han In-sung. In-sung, Han would be the American way of saying it, but Han In-sung, great man. He actually was the man who translated the Book of Mormon into Korean, excuse me, and he was the very first general authority from Korea. He was a member of the 70 from Korea. Anyway, but I think it's interesting. He talks about how despite this terrible war, most of the first generation of Latter-day Saints were young boys and girls when the Korean War broke out. So it was wartime when the restored gospel was first introduced to the Korean people. My story is like that of many Koreans. I was a young boy in the 7th grade, young enough to be wayward and still enjoying daily life when the war broke out in Korea. It was almost too much for me to face. The communists walked right into my home and took everything we had. They even killed some of our close family members. This happened to many Koreans. Life was filled with sudden disaster, fear, hopelessness, tragedy. Life was a meaningless, forced, and involuntary burden for all of us. There was nothing to look for, hope for, or dream of, right? And that's what he talks about, this general condition. And then he says, and in this climate of desperation, we first heard about the gospel of Jesus Christ, right, from these servicemen who were LDS and who shared the great knowledge that they had. What thoughts do you have as you think about a story like this and relate it?
I think it's interesting that, I've actually heard a lot of stories of missionary opportunities during wartime. And I think it just, there's proof that that Heavenly Father's hand is over all things, no matter how gray and dim it may seem. Wartime is probably a very powerful opportunity to serve. And I think that here's an instance of it. I mean, and then the previous instance where this I think his name was I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it was like Honam, and
Yeah.
he actually ended up serving positions in the church in Korea and stuff, and I think that's very powerful, and that's something that I think someone could look forward to if there was ever a war again.
Yeah, definitely, right? Those opportunities, right, amidst, tragedy, amidst disaster, right? God is still there. And I just think it's so amazing. I love this last section of the quote here. He said, we learned the value of eternal life. We learned that peace and joy can come to anyone who understands and accepts the gospel. We learned that we will meet again in the presence of our Lord with our loved ones who left us so tragically. There we would be a happy and eternal family unit. Wouldn't you say that the Koreans needed this restored message more than anybody else at that time? And truly, as you said, Caden, the Lord works in mysterious ways, and people's hearts are softened in sometimes the most unlikely of situations. You think of the tragedy of war, but yet, as Wendy said, look at what can happen. So thank you so much for that. Anybody else? Well, I just wanted to add my personal testimony here to this, especially as we talk about the Korean War, because, regardless of how the U.S. got into the war, as we know, right, God can use any situation for His purposes because He's in control. And as He inspires righteous people, they heed the call and they do good. And so, as I met with people on my mission in South Korea, which had been, a beneficiary of these LDS servicemen fighting alongside the ROK, the Republic of Korea, and then sharing the gospel with them. I met so many families who, had their start in the gospel, who had their first introduction to Christianity during the Korean War, and they're alive today. And I talked with them, and I talked with them about the war and about how they felt about America and about Christian missionaries and about LDS servicemen coming in. And it was just amazing to me. And I just had some pictures just to let you know that my life has been so blessed, in part, right, because of what happened as a byproduct, right, not as the intention of the Korean War, but as a byproduct of this war. Here's my first area with this beautiful little girl called Choi Ijin. I'll never forget it. When I couldn't speak Korean and nobody would speak with me because I didn't want to take the time to continue to try to translate to English, she came up to me one day and she said, you don't speak Korean very well, do you? And I said, no, I don't. And she said, that's okay. I'll be your friend anyway. And I'll just never forget that Christ-like love of a child. As I look at this is I served it for 11 and a half months in the deaf branch doing Korean Sign Language, and the man on the left with the long pants, which I think is kind of interesting. You see the man on the right has the short pants. If we could just find a happy medium, that would have been great for the baptism. But this man here, Lee Kyung-soo, what an amazing man. Baptized, felt the truth of the gospel, couldn't read the Book of Mormon, but yet knew it was true because he felt it. Here I am in Korea, a place that taught me a lot about really just what was most important in life. There were many people who just didn't have much. As you can see, I love the hanging squid, if you look very closely, in the middle of the picture above the wall there. Service, right, going to love the people you serve is such an amazing byproduct of a mission. You go there for others, but yet you're so enriched yourself. You see the great beauty of the land. Here I am with the rice field and a very dorky umbrella. Just some of the happiest memories of my whole life. Of course, marriage and family and continuing in the gospel plan has been just as rewarding and even more rewarding in some ways, but certainly this is a special time in my life. And, the love that you gain for the people you serve, the people you teach is just incredible. And this was one of my very last nights in Korea. I remember this sweet, sweet family that we shared this time together. And here in my very first area, the Hogyung Tech family, just unbelievable. They were so kind, and their family changed so much as a result of the gospel. Not anything that we did, but as a result of the gospel. And I'll never forget, they said, we see a light in your eyes, talking about my companion's eyes and my eyes, and they said, that's the light of the gospel, and that's what we want to have. And that's the miracle of the gospel. You meet people here. This is E.J. Ho, who had been inactive for about 20 years. He ended up getting cancer in his leg and having an amputation. I got to translate for that amputation in Korean Sign Language. Here he is selling some food on the street corner, and he ended up coming back to activity. He ended up baptizing his wife, who came into the church as a result of this, and just miracle after miracle with these amazing people in Korea. Truly, this beautiful land with a beautiful people and a beautiful culture, which was just enhanced by the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I'm just so grateful for my mission. I just wanted to open it up. How would you relate these experiences to your own missionary work that you've done, either at home or abroad? What would you say?
I would say that tragedy does open up people to missionary work, because the closest I've come to ever having success always comes when somebody's going through a really hard time in their life. One woman in particular, 5 horrible things happened to her within 1 year. It seems like that's when people's hearts soften.
Definitely. Yeah.
My thought is just that the gospel really is universal and can help people in any situation. Because I served in Sweden, and they've tried to stay out of just about any war possible, so they haven't really had any first-hand experiences with war like Korea for years and years and years, and yet they need the gospel just as much because they have their own problems. They have a lot of issues there, and so it's such a blessing that the gospel can come to them as well, and just to anybody anywhere in the world, whether they're facing war or bad politics or personal tragedies. The gospel's there, and it has the same message, and it can apply to any person in any situation. And so that's what I think touches me the most when I see so many different kinds of people in different situations have their lives changed by it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. What about you, Caden? Looking forward to going on a mission?
Yeah, you're sharing these experiences, and I appreciate it because you're getting me excited. And a recent experience that I had with this was, there's a family I home teach. They're an older couple, and they're brother and sister Kelly. And I think it was Monday, just this week, I was driving to school, and I was trying to get on time because I've been late a lot lately, and my truck ran out of gas, and so I just pulled up to the side of the road, and I thought, man, this is a bummer. What a way to start a week. It's a Monday, and I'm going to be late. And here comes Brother Kelly driving by, and he said something cheesy. I can't remember. But he picked me up, and he took me home. Actually, he didn't take me home. He took me to his house. And then he told me to go in his garage and grab some gas, and then we went back to my truck and put some gas in, and then he kind of took care of me. And I thought it reminded me of gosh, I don't want to tell too many stories, but after that happened, I started thinking, I think this is what missionary work's all about. Being there, because that's what Christ would do, and that's what he did. He served people. And he went out and he created opportunities to serve, and then he took opportunities to serve, and it opened up people's hearts. And that's a really small scale with my experience, but I relate that to me, and I think I want to do that too. I want to be able to be there for people, because it's when you're there and when you serve people, when they open up to you, and that's really what I think the gospel has a lot to do with is actually serving each other. Showing that form of love. And I looked at these pictures that you showed us, and there's still one right here, and I just see the happiness that comes from serving, and how the happiness is so real, and I'm excited to share that with people.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And truly, there's just so much love that you feel as a missionary, and because you're on fire with the Spirit, and that's the way it should be all the time, And what a great blessing! I just cannot think of my mission without feeling such a great debt of gratitude to my Heavenly Father for that experience. So I encourage it for everybody to continue to do it, and I pray that we'll continue to have these experiences this week, today, the next couple hours. Well, if we go then and we look at another aspect of containment during the early 1950s, we'll talk about CIA-led containment, which is very interesting. It's a new development. During the Eisenhower administration, the U.S. developed a new means for containing communism in the Third World, subverting anti-West governments through CIA influence and intervention. Allen Dulles, brother of Ike's Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, planted thousands of covert agents throughout the world to arrange secret payments to pro-West political parties and anti-socialist trade unions, pull local military strings to take dangerous socialists out of power or to install friendly leaders, train local anti-government forces, and sponsor or promote coup d'etat and assassinations. From Guatemala to Indochina to Iran, the U.S. intervened in the self-governance of nations to prevent Eisenhower's domino theory, the belief that losing one country to communism could lead to the loss of other countries around it, and eventually to the fall of all countries to Soviet influence, from becoming a reality. Well, if we look at Iran then in 1953, in this very interesting case, in Iran, the Islamic Shah, or emperor figure, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, admired American industry, education, and prosperity, and increasingly looked to the U.S. to solve his country's problems, such as dangerous Muslim clerics, power-hungry feudal landowners, communist influence, and oil-hungry foreign imperialists. In 1951, Shah Pahlavi was forced to accept Iran's parliament's choice for prime minister, liberal, nationalist, anti-Pahlavi, and democratic socialist Mohammad Mossadegh, who had been educated in Europe. Mossadegh quickly nationalized the Iranian oil industry, which had been owned chiefly by Britain's Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which later became British Petroleum, which you might know of today as BP, and the West feared that Mossadegh's move might set an undesirable precedent throughout the oil-rich Middle East. Kermit Roosevelt, the CIA chief in Iran, reacted by organizing and financing, along with Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, the SIS, Mossadegh's deposition, and by replacing him with General Fazlollah Zahedi, who was pro-Pahlavi and pro-West, and who would renegotiate oil contracts to give American companies 40% of Iran's oil concessions. Operation Ajax, as the CIA SIS-led coup was called, marked the first U.S. post-war attempt at removing a legitimate government in the Third World, one that had been popularly elected, which would set a dangerous precedent for the future. So, if we reason together then, right, from the declassified CIA summary of the Iran coup d'etat, right, what are the 7 reasons why the CIA expected Iran to fall to communism? This is first paragraph of page 57.
Do you want me to just read them?
Sure, or you can, sure.
That they couldn't, incapable of reaching an oil settlement with the West. They were reaching a dangerous stage of illegal financing, disregarding their constitution, in keeping Mossadegh in office. They were motivated mainly by Mossadegh's desire for power, was governed by irresponsible policies based on emotion, had weakened the Shah and the Iranian army to a dangerous degree, and had cooperated closely with the Communist Party in Iran.
Okay, excellent, right? So these are, right, the reasons behind it. Okay, and then they talk about, well, what would be the effects, according to this document, of Iran falling behind the Iron Curtain? And once again, a very interesting statement.
It would be a major setback for the West and a major victory for the Soviets.
Right. And so really, as we try to understand, remember at the very beginning, we talked a little bit, well, what was the Cold War? Well, here it is right here. If that happened, it would mean a victory for the Soviets in the Cold War and a major setback for the West in the Middle East. And so this is what the war's about. Well, how does the CIA then justify the use of covert action in Iran? What would that action do?
They're saying that no other remedial
Western thinking.
Mm-hmm. And go ahead, Wendy.
They just said no other action could improve the state of affairs. They wanted the Mossadegh government to fall and the Shah to reestablish himself.
Right. So, and I think this is very interesting to think about that we should do this, right, to improve the existing state of affairs. Well, if we look then at some general and then some specific aims of Operation Ajax, which is what this operation would be called, what would they be? Do you remember them? You can read them, or if you remember them, you can just shout them out.
Well, it's the top paragraph, right? The aim was to bring to power a government which would reach an equitable oil settlement and also enable Iran to become economically sound and financially solvent and would vigorously prosecute the Communist Party.
Right. Yeah. So those are the three specific, and we could couple those, right, with the fall of the Mossadegh government, reestablishing the prestige and power of the Shah, and then also replacing the Mossadegh government with one that would govern Iran according to constructive policies, right? So it's very interesting to see the aims behind this. Well, and with whom was the operation jointly coordinated? I think it is interesting to make sure that we know we didn't just act alone.
The SIS in Britain.
Right, the SIS, right? Okay, Secret Intelligence Service. So it sounds like somebody's shaking pepper.
Sorry,
No,
it's
that's okay.
probably my bird. Let me mute myself.
Oh, no. I actually liked it. I thought it was nice. No, you're fine. I'm just curious. Well, if we reason then, here's the first one, right? Listen to this. Moroni placed spies round about that he might know when the camp of the Lamanites should come. And now, as Moroni knew the intention of the Lamanites, that it was their intention to destroy their brethren, or to subject them and bring them into bondage, that they might establish a kingdom unto themselves over all the land. And he also, knowing that it was the only desire of the Nephites to preserve their lands and their liberty and their church, therefore he thought it no sin that he should defend them by stratagem. Therefore he found by his spies which course the Lamanites were to take. How does this relate? Does this not relate? What would we say?
It feels sometimes pretty nasty to be using the same kind of conniving strategies that Satan uses. But there are times when God asks us to be harmless as doves and wise as serpents, and so it's incumbent upon us to figure out when those times are. I have a personal experience with this one, though, in politics, and
Yeah.
I can testify firsthand that it is not pleasant to have to employ to have to be wise as a serpent and employ these kind of strategies. It's really unsettling.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, because I don't know about anybody else, but I know I certainly don't have any direct experience with politics or government. So thank you for that, Wendy. Any other takes on this? I have another quote to follow it up. Well, here's the one side, and then here's another, and you can tell me which one you think applies more. And it came to pass that they did have their signs, yea, their secret signs, and their secret words, in this that they might distinguish a brother who had entered into the covenant, that whatsoever wickedness his brother should do, he should not be injured by his brother, nor by those who did belong to his band who had taken this covenant. And thus they might murder, and plunder, and steal, and commit whoredoms, and all manner of wickedness, contrary to the laws of their country, and also the laws of their God. Which one do you think relates more to this CIA covert action? Alma or Helaman? Stratagem or secret combinations?
Well, definitely Alma, because they had good intentions. I mean, when I first read it, I thought, ooh, that seems kind of sneaky. I don't know if I feel comfortable with that.
Uh-huh.
And then at the same time, I thought, well, that's really naive if I want to think the other side is not doing it and that I should just sit back and expect all to be well.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, thanks so much for that.
I mean, not that you should resort to lowering yourself to their standards, but sometimes you can't just sit back and think everything's fine. You have to be proactive. And really, the Book of Mormon is totally proactive about preparing themselves, for dangerous times to come or war or whatever. So.
Yeah, thanks so much for that comment, Heidi. Anybody else?
I think I'll reserve judgment to God because
Right.
I really can't figure this one out on my own, and it seems like a lot of times it looks like the motive is to win over or get rid of communism, but in looking over the last 50 years of U.S. foreign policy, sometimes it almost seems like we foment more problems than we solve when we use these kinds of strategies. And I don't know, I'm not saying that there wouldn't be a proper place and time for using these kinds of strategies. I'm just not sure that everyone who are the decision makers have the proper motives.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and certainly, I put these two quotes up just to show sort of two of the most dominant ways of thinking about CIA covert action. Some people say, yeah, it's justified and we've got to do it. Others say, well, wait a minute, we're breaking laws here. We're breaking laws of nations. We're breaking laws of God. Is this right? And so it's really an interesting one for sure. And it gives me personally, I can say, just a lot to think about. Anyway, so we can think about it.
Well, I think it's important to go back to the
This one?
I think it's important to go back to the scripture that we read about that really we are going to change things more through proclaiming the Word of God than we are through covert operations.
Right,
to really
right.
put our focus on there.
Yeah.
Or maybe we're asking the wrong question. We should be saying, how can we better spread the gospel rather than how can we,
Yeah, certainly, right. Internal to external, right?
Right.
Rather than externally just taking out a government that could turn communist, right? Maybe we should focus more on planting the seeds of the gospel so they'll govern themselves righteously. Yeah, no, that's a great comment, Heidi. Thank you so much for that. Well, if we look at McCarthyism then and Cold War paranoia, another, once again, just complicated and interesting and sad topic. There's just so much wrapped up in it. Paranoia over communist subversion reached a fever pitch in the U.S. during the Eisenhower years. The loss of China, a stalemate in Korea, even though, of course, the Korean War did contain communism, but the U.S. coalition, right, didn't win, which troubled a lot of people. Soviet development of an atomic bomb, and intense political battles between Republicans and Democrats about true Americanism all contributed to a Red Scare that excited fear and at times hysteria in America. Following the lead of the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, which had during the late 1940s held widely publicized investigations of Hollywood employees, encouraged blacklists for those of suspicious loyalty, imprisoned former high-ranking State Department official Alger Hiss, and generally cast suspicion on a generation of liberal Democrats. And the Truman administration, which had pressured over 2,000 government employees to resign following loyalty reviews, witnessed Congress passing the McCarran Internal Security Act to require all communist organizations to register with the government and publish their records, and stood by while Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were sentenced to death for alleged espionage. By the early 1950s, local, state, and national organizations clamored to purge themselves of real or imagined communist subversives, and an obscure first-term senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy, captivated and intimidated the nation for 4 years with accusations of subversion. McCarthy grabbed the spotlight after a speech in Wheeling, West Virginia, in which he claimed knowledge of 205 communist conspirators, then at work in the U.S. State Department. Within weeks, McCarthy expanded his list to finger even more government officials throughout Washington. As the chair of a special subcommittee, McCarthy called in scores of government officials, and in highly publicized trials, harangued witnesses with vituperative assaults, which intimidated any opposition and ruined public careers left and right. By 1954, after almost 4 years of witch hunting and fear-mongering, McCarthy had not produced solid evidence that even one federal employee had held ties to communism. During nationally televised congressional hearings in June 1954, McCarthy appeared deranged and almost laughable in heaping wild charges of communist subversion on the U.S. Army. On the 2nd of December 1954, the Senate voted 67-22 to censure him for contempt of the Senate. 3 years later, broken by his meteoric fall from grace and ruined by alcoholism, he died at 48. So, if we take a look at Senate Resolution 301, how did Senator McCarthy obstruct the constitutional processes of the Senate?
Well, it sounds a lot just because
Incredible.
he failed to cooperate.
Mm-hmm.
And it says he affected the honor of the Senate, too.
Yep.
Kept people from doing their duties. And
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Heidi. Wendy, did you also have something to say?
Yeah, I imagine that he was sincere. I don't know. But I guess there always remains something that we should consider. You know, for example, with all these Tea Party movements going on today, now we start to hear rumblings about racists infiltrating the parties and Nazis and all kinds of extremists.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is turning the whole nation against some principles that were really valid and really good. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we just always need to be on the lookout for infiltration from people who are trying to discredit an otherwise good movement.
Right, definitely, because if you think about it, right at the core, right, as you said, he was genuinely concerned, right, about communism subverting, right, American forms of government and the American government itself. And so because of that, right, he has this cause, and, you know, as he is trying to follow it and trying to see if, you know, there are people there, well, you know, certainly history has judged him as you know, going to extremes, getting out of hand, really sort of creating more trouble than good, unfortunately. But yeah, certainly, right? He had these intentions, and truly, I mean, he's a sad story. I mean, I truly, my heart goes out to Joseph McCarthy. What a sad life. You know, he thought he was doing the right thing, and then really just kind of lost it in some ways, and by the end, and then. As he fell really hard and then turned to the bottle and just started and really just drank away the rest of his life. And he died, you know, just so young. And so, you know, just a sad story all the way around. So I appreciate that comment, Wendy, as something that we definitely should keep in mind. Well, as we look at
And it really seems that that's the precedent here. And all these ways that the U.S. chose to fight communism, whether it was the Vietnam War, which is unwinnable, whether it was McCarthyism, which was extremist, whether it was overthrowing popular elections in the Middle East, which ended up creating more anger, you know. It just seems like all the ways that we went and continue to go about fighting evil, they turn against us, and it's almost like somebody or someone is. You know, it just can't be that someone isn't smart enough to prevent that from happening in every single case. It's almost like I don't know. I just see all these attempts as having been failed and turning out poorly, and it's really frustrating.
right. Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. Thanks for the comment. Well, you know, I think it's just sad to see, you know, how by the end, you know, he was treating, you know, fellow senators who were just trying to figure out if he should be censured or not. Certainly, you know, he started to accuse them, even saying that they were the unwitting handmaiden, involuntary agents, attorneys in fact of the Communist Party, you know, charging them with imitating communist methods, distorting, misrepresenting, omitting. You know, just by the end, he just lost all credibility, and it's very sad. You know, very, very sad. Well, as we take a look here at this quote, I think it's an important one for us to remember. This is by President Faust in October 2002, called "Be Not Afraid." And here, take a look at this, read it to yourself, and then what's the great principle that we can relate to ourselves that also, of course, relates back to Joseph McCarthy.
This is what I was thinking about just throughout all of these different scenarios is this idea of fear, and it seems like every method used to fight communism they're all driven by fear. This kind of blacklisting and McCarthyism of just pointing fingers, afraid, you know, that everybody around you is a communist, and being afraid of the domino, you know, theory, and so attacking different countries and trying to take out governments and just war. I mean, it all seemed to be, driven by fear. And I like how President Faust says here, but fear need not control us. And that's Satan's tool, is to make us afraid. And he says we need not become paralyzed with fear of Satan's power. He can have no power over us unless we permit it. And I just really love how the gospel is not based on fear, but, of power, a sound mind, of love. And that's kind of where I think we can go wrong a lot in our lives, is if we choose to be driven by fear, which, as President Faust says here, it is a choice.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that. And, and I just love what you say, because, there are bad things that happen in the world, right? And he's not trying to say that there are not. But yet we always can choose how we react to them. And that doesn't mean that we don't try to make things right, that we don't try to do our part in improving the world and standing for truth and that sort of thing. But it just means that we don't have to become, as you said, paralyzed by it. And certainly, the paranoia of the Cold War was just a sad time, because so many Americans became paralyzed, right, by something that turned into, a hysteria of just epic proportions. And it was just too bad to see so much faith lost by some people and replaced, by fear. And I just, certainly I know that that's not the way the Heavenly Father would have us live our lives.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I don't know much about McCarthy, really, but wasn't there some truth to what he said? Because Alger Hiss, I thought he was a communist.
Well, Alger Hiss wasn't related to McCarthy. He actually came earlier during the Truman administration, and McCarthy started. Turning. I should say, Alger Hiss was going around 47, 48, and then we see McCarthy between 50 and 54. And so McCarthy didn't have anything to do with Alger Hiss, and Alger Hiss was imprisoned. But all the people who McCarthy accused, actually, none of them were ever proved to be associated with communism in any culpable way.
Oh, okay. It seems like I heard President Benson speaking one time where he was saying something about McCarthy and how he felt like he had kind of gotten the raw end of the deal. So I don't know. I need to look into it more, I guess.
Yeah, well, certainly, as was said before, I think it's important to note that, he may have had very righteous intentions, and may have had righteous fears about what was going on, but at the same time, the way he went about it ended up going to extremes that were unhealthy, and ruined not only his career but the careers of many others in ways that perhaps could have been avoided by more level-headed action.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, if we take a look then, Orwell, 1984, this great excerpt that you read, how is the excerpt symptomatic of Cold War paranoia? There's lots of great things in there. What are Orwell's fears about a dystopian future of totalitarianism? Describe the world of 1984. What's that world like?
Well, part of it, I think, describes the natural results of a totalitarian state of government, which is lack of food, lack of electricity, lack of good living standards. In addition to all the draconian methods of spying on people and not feeling like you're entitled to even your own thoughts, and changing the way people speak, changing even down to the newspapers that they, past editions of newspapers to go in line with what the party was predicting, and a continual state of war, which relates to your former quotes about Satan using fear. This society was kept in a constant state of war. As long as the people, the government was telling them we had something to be afraid of and we have to keep fighting war, they could control them better.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great summary, Wendy. And I think it's especially important to note those parts where, history was literally rewritten, right, to be in line with the party, which I think is just such a it's a very interesting proposition to see history changed to become more of a usable past. Right. Well, what do you think? How accurate are Orwell's fictional predictions of the future, and which fictional predictions resonate the most with you? Why? What would you say? Was he totally off base? Somewhat right? Was he a lot right? What do you think?
I remember the first time I read this book, the newspeak thing, I was like, why is the author spending so much time on this newspeak concept? I just was like, I don't get that. Why would that be so important? But now later, I see how movements like to gain control over how they define a concept, whether it's, to use a silly example or a simple example, pro-life versus pro-choice. There's definitely power in being the one who frames the words that people are going to use in their day-to-day conversation. We see this especially in the gay rights movement and lots of other things. So I thought that resonates with me now more than it used to.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. Anybody else? Well, oh, go ahead.
It reminds me of what I tell my kids, that it just takes so much more effort to lie than it does to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, right? You have to have a really good memory if you're a liar. So.
Yeah, just all the backtracking they had to go and do. I mean, wow, it's an incredible amount of work.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that comment, Heidi. Let's just close here with this great quote by Elder Cook. His talk, Live by Faith and Not by Fear. He said, I know that many of you are concerned about raising your children during these difficult times and increasing their faith. When my wife and I were starting our family in the San Francisco Bay Area, we had that same concern. At a critical point, our stake members were advised by Elder Harold B. Lee, then a member of the 12, that we could raise our families in righteousness if we would, 1, follow the prophet, 2, create the true spirit of the gospel in our hearts and homes, 3, be a light to those among whom we live, 4, focus on the ordinances and principles taught in the temple. As we followed this counsel, our faith increased and our fears decreased. I believe we can raise righteous children anywhere in the world if they are taught religious principles in the home. When we choose to follow Christ in faith rather than choosing another path out of fear, we are blessed with a consequence that is consistent with our choice. May we all recognize and give thanks for the incomparable gift of life we enjoy and for the breath that he lends us daily. May we choose to have conviction at the crossroads of life and exercise faith in Jesus Christ. My prayer is that we will live by faith and not by fear. So any closing thoughts about this and how it could relate to what we've been talking about today and how it relates to our lives today?
Well, I really like it because something like 1984 is very frightening. It is, a worst-case scenario in a lot of ways, but there are a lot of concepts in there that we see today or that we're not too far from them in the world, and it is scary to think about, but I really like how all of the quotes you've shared with us today from the Brethren and from the Scriptures just teach us that we really do need to drive out that fear, because that's what Satan would have us do. He tries to inspire people to do bad things, and then he tries to get the other people to just be afraid of it. And so I like how ending with this, realizing we do need to live with faith no matter what's going on in the world and no matter what we're against, in our personal lives and in the global perspective as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great comment. Anybody else?
Yeah, I like it as well, because it gives a lot of hope, and I'm grateful for the gospel for that it offers so much hope. And I also like how he says that, we could raise, it's in the first little bullet point area, about in the middle. We could raise our families in righteousness. Oh, wait, no. Where is it? He says anywhere in the world somewhere. Found it. It's in the second bullet point. I believe we can raise righteous children anywhere in the world. And when I heard anywhere in the world, I thought maybe even at any time. No matter how bleak it may seem, there's always the gospel, and there's always that hope in the ability to teach your children in love and righteousness. It's very inspiring to me, and it gets me excited to be a dad, and then also to preach this gospel on my mission. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's a good way to end it.
Well, thank you so much for that comment, Kate, and I appreciate it very much. Anybody else?
You know, the problem I see is that we walk a really fine line today. When we tell the truth, a lot of times it sounds like we're fearful or we're, fear-mongering or whatever, and yet when things are told in truth, that's what sheds light on things. Because, I hear people talking about, people that are on the radio or whatever, well, they're just fear-mongering. And I'm thinking, but if they're telling the truth, is that really fear-mongering? Are they really just stirring up fear? Or do you see the line I'm talking about? That yes, we need to have faith that things are going to work out, but we also have to expose the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where we walk a fine line, deciding exactly how we're going to do that, what that's going to look like.
Yeah, and I think that's a great comment, and I think it's important to keep in mind, there is a difference between what and how. And, what we say, I think sometimes, while it is very important, might not be as important, perhaps, as how we say it, because, I just think I'm always amazed when I listen to the prophet speak at General Conference, and he will confront all of these amazingly difficult and edgy social issues, and he will do it with such confidence, but also such love, but firmness, but also, with just this great Christ-like spirit and with Christ-like attributes. And I think that, as we learn to express truth, whatever that truth may be, in a Christ-like way, then we'll never go wrong. And I think that's one of the great lessons for me, because as we said, somebody like Joseph McCarthy, had great intentions, was trying to save the country from a subversion that was happening around the world, that was feared to be happening in America, that had been proven to have happened in the United States before on certain occasions, and so because of that, he had a great what to say, that we need to watch out for this. But in how he went about it, that's where he lost a lot of people, and that's where he lost a lot of respect, and that's where he created a lot of fear that perhaps didn't need to be created in that way. And I think we always have a choice. We can live with a negative, cynical, suspicious, angry, finger-pointing attitude, at the opposition, or we can, view everybody as children of God and just live the gospel and teach truth the way it should be taught. And I'm just so grateful for these wonderful examples of righteous priesthood leaders who teach truth in Christ-like ways, and I'm grateful that we've been able to see some of those today. That's a great comment, Heidi, and I just thank you for it very much, because I think it really does strike at a core issue of all that we're talking about today. So thank you so much. Well, our time's up. And I once again just thank you so much for your great participation. Next week, I look forward to lots of other great things. We'll be talking about the Berlin Wall, the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis. We'll be talking about Vietnam. We'll talk about Chile and Operation Condor and lots of other great things. And so it'll be great. So stay tuned. See you on Tuesday and Wednesday next week. I once again thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.